Let me silence my phone. All right. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for coming to the launch and introduction of the CDB and JAMPRO's collaboration business model for animation studios in the Caribbean project. It's a mouthful, I know. My name is Tristan Alain, and I'm the Senior Officer in the Film, Animation, and Music Department at JAMPRO, and I'll be joined shortly by Nika Luke, Project Manager for the initial phase of this project. Our role at JAMPRO is to create, facilitate, and advance business opportunities with the goal of developing an enabling business environment and increasing exports and investments. So we jumped at the opportunity when CDB's Cultural and Creative Industries Investment Fund, the CIIF, put out a call for projects under its Enabling Environment Grant. And we're very grateful to the CDB for having accepted our proposal. Our project aims to create a model of a unified animation production pipeline in the Caribbean, from training to the development and promotion of animation projects and services. It takes advantage of our relative strengths in animation in the region. At present, collaboration does happen between animation studios on an ad hoc basis. We want to create a tool to make that collaboration more consistent, resulting in more servicing contracts, more Caribbean IP created, and more growth in the industry. Our first task with this project was to contract Nika Luke as our project manager for the initial phase. Nika is a principal consultant who has worked in the Caribbean film industry for the last 7 years. First as an external relations director for the Trinidad and Tobago Film Festival, and more recently as general manager and film commissioner of the Trinidad and Tobago Film Company, the Film TT. In these roles, she has had a direct impact on the development of the film industry in Trinidad and Tobago and has built a valuable regional and international network. So we think she's a perfect fit to develop this project. Stage One Business Solutions, who Nika works for now, is a general consultancy that offers strategic and practical guidance to clients on developing and executing projects for growth, impact, and success. Projects like this one. The consultancy has been engaged by JAMPRO to research and develop the business model for increasing cooperation among animation service companies in the Caribbean region. So I'll hand over to Nika in a moment, and she'll give more context around the project, what we aim to achieve with it and where we are right now, and how we want you to be involved. But before I hand over, I want to share some ground rules for this webinar. As you can see on your screen, the webinar is being recorded. All video and audio has been turned off for the participants. If you have questions, please type it in the Q&A box below, and we'll address them as soon as Nika is finished. So we'll have an opportunity to have a back and forth, to hear your input, to answer your questions, and better discuss what your involvement may look like. And your questions will be answered live. Okay, so over to you, Nika. Thank you once again, everyone, for participating.
Okay, good afternoon, and thanks, Tristan, for the introduction. Great. Thanks for the introduction, Tristan. And on behalf of the CDB, JAMPRO, and the Caribbean partners, I am very pleased to be here with you all today to present just some thoughts on what it is that we are aiming to do with this project. I, first of all, want to just acknowledge the partners and the representatives of the CDB who are on the call today, and I will introduce them when I get to that point of the presentation. So we are launching this project pretty early on in the process. And at this time, we'll talk about what we know and what we're aiming to achieve. And as Tristan said, what it is that how we hope to engage the stakeholders in this project. The project will take approximately 11 months. We started at the beginning of September. And what will follow for the next few months really is a period of discovery to determine what the sector looks like, what are the gaps, the selling points, etc., for the region in terms of why the Caribbean, why should potential clients choose the Caribbean for something like this? And then, as he said, ultimately create a business model that companies around the region can leverage and use. As he said as well, after the presentation, we will happily take your questions, which I will do my best to answer. And if I'm not able to answer, we will certainly note them for future response. So we will get into it now. So first of all, I have to acknowledge the source of the funding for this project. The Cultural and Creative Industries Innovation Fund, known as the CIIF, is a program of the Caribbean Development Bank, which was launched in 2018. And the fund's role is to support the overall development of creative and cultural industries in its 19 borrowing member countries. Now, the role of the CIIF in terms of how it's set up is to provide support for enabling the environment for the development of the creative industries. It is also intended to improve the quality of and access to creative industries research. They're also looking for projects or support projects that would improve data intelligence and collection methods within the creative industries, and also projects that would improve technical capacity of creative entrepreneurs in the region. So this project specifically is supported from a grant from the CIIF that is supporting the enabling environment for the development of the CIs in the region. I would encourage everyone on the call, if you're interested, to certainly check with the CIIF on their website. It's listed on the screen for when there are calls, because they are usually running calls on a regular basis for different kinds of projects that they're looking for. I'd like to acknowledge Dr. Mariel Barrow-Mena on the call. She's the fund coordinator, and to acknowledge her efforts as well in championing and supporting this project. So, as Tristan mentioned, JAMPRO, in its role as the agency, Jamaican agency that promotes business opportunities and export and investment, JAMPRO is the lead the lead on this project in terms of having applied for the grant, and they have engaged several partners in the region who will contribute information and contribute in terms of what is happening on the ground in their countries. The initial focus for the grant, for the project, is going to be Trinidad and Tobago, Jamaica, and Barbados, with the intent of expanding once the project is off the ground and the model is working, with the intent of expanding across the region. So I will just briefly mention a little bit about each of the partners who are currently committed to the project. The Jamaica Animation Nation Network, which is JAN, serves as the association representing all practitioners of the animation industry in Jamaica. And I'd like to acknowledge Kevin Jackson, who's the outgoing president, and Shireen Pert, who's the incoming president of JAN. The National Cultural Foundation in Barbados. This is a government agency whose mandate is to oversee the cultural landscape of Barbados, and certainly something like this falls within their mandate. And I'd like to acknowledge Andre Hoyt, who's the Senior Business Development Officer at the NCF, and his team. We also have as a key partner on this project, the Trinidad and Tobago Animation Network, TTAN. They represent a growing base of animation professionals in Trinidad and Tobago, and they are actively working on building Trinidad and Tobago and the wider Caribbean as a hub. So this is something that falls well within their interest in terms of animation in Trinidad and Tobago and the Caribbean. And I'd like to acknowledge TTAN's president, Jessica Yoching, and Marissa Bengoche, who are working with us on this project. Anime Carib, also based in Trinidad and Tobago, has been since 2001 a platform to raise awareness of animation and technology in the Caribbean. The festival, which takes place in Trinidad and Tobago, has attracted top animators from studios over the years, such as DreamWorks, Aardman, Pixar, Cartoon Network, and Nickelodeon. The festival has been a space to host workshops and to present the business of animation to novice and professional animators. And I'd like to acknowledge directors Roxanne Coltrust and Camille Selvon Abrahams. So collectively, this is the contributing group of companies that are working on this project. Initially, as I mentioned, to focus on the scope of Trinidad and Tobago, Jamaica, and Barbados with the intention of expanding. So what is this project intended to achieve? These 4 objectives really make up the why of this project in terms of what it is that at the end of the period of time, what we will have in place. The project is intended to research, design, test, and publish a business model for how companies in the region can pool regional resources to grow the animation industry. So essentially, we're calling it, we're calling it a business model, but ultimately what we're looking for is a tool that companies in the region can access and use in order to access work abroad and also to potentially generate more IP for themselves here in the region. So the business model is intended also to increase outsourcing of contracts, as I mentioned. It's intended to facilitate and encourage regional business-to-business collaboration in order to advance revenue-generating animation projects. And the intent really also is to leverage the existing pool of incentives and resources across our islands, leverage the fact that we have the Caribbean single market economy to also add to the pool of what makes the region potentially attractive. So why is this project important? Why is it that JAMPRO decided to apply for this grant and to try to bring this project to fruition? Well, we definitely think it's important for more animation companies to be able to scale up to pitch for new opportunities. We have heard, and certainly there have been examples of the companies in the region not being able to access or to be able to be equipped to access potential contracts that have come their way. We know that the industry is very fragmented in terms of there's a lot of activity happening, but it's happening in small spaces. So the potential to have a tool where businesses can coalesce around pooling their resources together in order to get contracts is actually it's something that can open up new opportunities for animation companies in the region. We also see this tool as just one piece of trying to build a sustainable foundation for the animation sector in the Caribbean. The intent really is to help the sector to become more organized, more connected, and more structured, and therefore have a greater chance at long-term success. Of course, we all know from the point of view of our Caribbean economies, there is a need to diversify away from the traditional sources of income for our countries, which tends to be tourism, financial services, and oil and gas. And we know for a fact that creative industries continue to increase in value, even while these different industries have actually taken a bit of a hit over the course of the last several years. So the creative industries continues to be, I would say, a safe investment in terms of where it is that that the industry is going globally and in the region and in the Caribbean region. So in terms of how we're going to do this, or the process for doing this, the project, as I mentioned, is going to run for about 11 months. We've already started, and we're right now in the initial phase of the project. We're essentially establishing the foundation for it, and then we'll go into the execution phase. We are looking also at what we will produce along with the animation tool, as I mentioned, and what forms it will ultimately take. So we also intend to produce some current research on the animation industry in terms of where the industry is right now. As we all know, a lot of things are in flux. A lot of industries that would have been chugging along pre-COVID-19 now have to reassess how they are functioning. So now is a really good time to take a scan of the industry and see what is actually happening internationally, what is happening in the region, and how the work that Caribbean companies can be looking for, make sure that they are in the best position to access the work. We would also want to produce an online database of the resources in the Caribbean, the regional animation companies, and other related resources. Initially, as I mentioned, in Jamaica, Barbados, and Trinidad and Tobago, but definitely with the intent of expanding across the region. The database would be available not just to the regional interests, but also to international potential clients. And this is something that would be maintained by the different partners across the region. And we're also going to be working on producing what essentially is an aggregate of regional incentives, trade agreements, and other resources that can make outsourcing to the Caribbean and investing in our IP certainly more attractive. So some of us may have heard about the different trade agreements that exist that have the potential to support the creative industries, but some of these things may not necessarily have been leveraged to date. And so we want to ensure that any Caribbean company looking to pitch for a job can say, okay, if you're using an animation company in Trinidad and Tobago and Barbados, then these are the resources that our countries can bring to the table. These are the resources that the region can bring to the table. In terms of the process, what we will actually be doing, and this is largely the work that as the principal consultant I've been engaged to do, working alongside the partners in each country. In the initial phase, as I mentioned, we're laying the foundation for the project. We are starting the desk research. We are going to see, based on what we find, how we can start to envision what this tool is going to look like. As I said in the beginning, this is a period of discovery in terms of figuring out what is this actually going to look like, how is it going to function, etc. So all of the work in this, certainly a lot of the work in this phase is going to inform that. We would, of course, want to know, well, who are the companies out there that have the potential to access or use something like this? So we would want to, again, leveraging the partners on the ground in each country to be able to access their databases of stakeholders and update them as we need to. So we know who to pull from when it is that it's time to activate. We will also be developing a selection process for testing the model. Once we have something that we think can work, we would want to have the companies that actually are doing this work actually test it out. So we'll get into that in a bit more detail. And we'll also develop and launch an explainer video, which will essentially be something that we can present not only to you as stakeholders, but also to potential clients to say this is something that's coming for the region. And I want to acknowledge Listen to Me Caribbean and their partners who have been contracted to actually produce this video. In the execution phase, which will immediately follow, that will run from about December 2020 until about June 2021. And the intent here is to work with the partners to, again, do that aggregate work of finding all of the up-to-date agreements, finding all of the incentives that are available, and putting them together in a way that's easily accessible. Any additional desk research that needs to be done based on what we found in the last few months. We'll complete the model in the execution phase. We would have also previously have done, as I said, developed a process for testing the model. And now in the execution phase, we will actually be looking for companies to test the model out using an agreed piece of IP in essentially a virtual incubator sort of approach. And then at the end of the project, we will publish the model for regional animation companies to use. Now, I do want to say here that we do recognize that, and there are many examples of companies across the region that are already finding ways to work with each other, that are finding ways to leverage the strengths that each company has. What we would like to do through this process is essentially give that a bit more of a boost, give it more structure, and build on what companies that are out there that have already done this work, already have seen the value of collaboration, to be able to help them to build on that through this tool. So we acknowledge and recognize a number of key regional stakeholders that are going to be really integral to this project. Of course, the animation companies and freelancers and resources, people who work within the industry. And of course, I'm not just talking about the artists, the business behind the creation of the content. All of that is really important, and they are really key to this process. The training institutions who are teaching the next generation of animation professionals. We would also be looking as best as we can at what it is that is actually being taught right now in terms of animation and related animation disciplines, and seeing how what the gaps are, and perhaps making recommendations for how that can be improved. But certainly it's important to look at what is being taught. Otherwise, you may have a situation where the gap continues to get wider as the industry proceeds, but the training isn't necessarily keeping up with that. So it's something that we want to take a look at. We also would be engaging as a key stakeholder the government agencies that manage incentives and trade agreements. Really important because, again, as we know, there's some agreements and incentives that may have been in place for some time and may not have been fully leveraged. And so this is an opportunity through developing this grant and with the supports of the CDB and the CIIF to be able to ensure that these incentives and trade agreements are working to the advantage of stakeholders in the Caribbean. And also private sector companies that would potentially increase their hiring once they are able to see that the animation companies and the professionals are mobilizing themselves to do more work and to do, let's say, higher levels of work. In the course of the research as well, we will be aiming to identify other regional stakeholders that could have a positive impact on the success of this project. So stakeholder involvement in the process is also very important. Ultimately, we don't want to create something that isn't usable or create something that isn't accessible. So the involvement of stakeholders is going to be really critical throughout the process, not just in, let's say, contributing updated information for the resource database, but also any data that people may have access to, making sure the information we have in terms of who's working in the industry, what are their specializations, all of that information is key for us to have, so that once the model goes live, we are able to present people who are at the highest levels of readiness to be able to use the model. There's also the potential, as I mentioned, to participate in developing and testing the business model before it is released. We will also be doing an open call to select companies that are at that stage of investment readiness, and the companies will work together in a virtual incubator to test the model using agreed IP. We would also be looking at the partners who have committed to the project to support the selection of these companies. And so the intent is for everything to be, we want to be objective, we want to be realistic about where we are, and identify, as I mentioned, the gaps for then. Once we know where we are, then we can identify the gaps for where we need to go. Just a little bit about the global view. We are very early in the research phase of this project, but it is undeniable, as I mentioned, that it's quite a lucrative industry. These figures should be of no surprise to anyone that it's a $2.25 trillion industry when you look at creative industries on the whole. And it is projected that these sectors within cultural and creative industries will represent about 10% of global GDP down the line. The number of jobs it generates, the fact that it's focused on largely on the young people who are interested in these kinds of things. This is something that we will be looking at seriously in terms of how what's happening internationally and what we can learn from in terms of developing these models. We are looking at countries like South Korea, for example, who built a vibrant and lucrative industry pretty much from the ground up. And we're already seeing some of the similarities where There are companies that specialize in different phases of production, and they're supported by a floating group of freelancers. Of course, we're talking scale when it comes to South Korea and the Caribbean, but certainly a lot that we could learn from them and other countries that have similarly built their industries from the ground up. So at this stage, I will close simply by saying we are really excited to work on this project. It's certainly something that is relevant to where we are in the Caribbean in terms of the value of our creative and cultural industries. Animation, of course, is one part of the amazing content that we are able to produce. I really see this project as something that can bring together all of the different resources that we already have. So we're not looking at necessarily just saying, let's only look at what's new, but we already have resources that perhaps could be leveraged more effectively. We have the talent, we know that for sure, that's undeniable. And the development of this model hopefully should move the industry further another step and allow for more content to be generated, not just local regional content, but also for more contracts, more opportunities, more jobs to be brought into the region. So on behalf of the partners and on behalf of the CDB and the CIIF, I would just like to say thanks for joining us today, and we are open and welcome your questions.
Thank you, Nika, for that clear and thorough explanation of the project and where we are now. As you said, we do recognize that there is some level of collaboration right now in animation in the region, but the idea of this project is to make that collaboration more efficient. There are challenges that we recognize already, barriers to that collaboration. Training is inconsistent across the region. Production pipelines aren't oriented so that there's a kind of perfect plugging in from animation studios in different countries. And there's a lack of specialization. And we think that positioning our animation studios to better be able to cooperate with each other would put us in a better position to benefit from that $250 billion export number that you had identified, and it's very important. So thank you, Nika. Thank you to the CDB again. Thank you to the partners as well. And we're open to your questions. The first one I see is, will this be recorded and available for review later? Yes, it will. We will have it available and we will share it afterwards. Let's see what else we have. Where do support services fall within the architecture framework of the animation business model? For instance, music, audio production, sound engineering. Nika, you want to take that one?
Well, as I mentioned, you know, I think this model will definitely take into consideration the full pipeline of activities required to create content. Obviously, I would say there's an opportunity, even as we develop the model, to highlight regional creators of that kind of work. So as you said, music that supports the animated content, all of the different sectors. So I'd say, in short, the answer is yes, I do think we will have to look at the full pipeline, or the full value chain rather, of all of the different services that are involved. The ultimate output in terms of the model or the tool itself is something that would have to work for all practitioners within the animation industry.
Yeah, thank you, Nika. Okay, so we were also asked, can you explain what you mean by a tool for collaboration? Is it like a system of steps? So I'll take that one. Basically, one, we're in the research and development process, so we're not exactly sure what that tool will look like yet, but we do know what outcomes we do want from the tool. We call it a tool because it's a model that we want it to be used as a practical guide for studios, for the training institutions, for the support institutions as well. So it is like a system of steps. It's a best practice for those institutions and studios to adapt to be able to best position themselves to collaborate with other animators in the region. So that's why we call it a tool, because we want to be specific that it will be of practical use, and not just a report that will, not ultimately have the outcomes that we're looking for, which is more growth, more IP, and more servicing contracts to the region. Okay, so where can freelance animators go to be a part of this? Nika?
Well, I think initially we will want to ensure that freelance animators who are definitely key to the process that we have them in our database. If freelancers are currently working with animation companies, it would also be important, I think, to identify that, because the call would be to companies. When we do the call to testy model, it would be to companies. It wouldn't necessarily be to individuals based on the needs of the project. So I would say that when we are putting together our stakeholder database, and again, we're going to be doing that with the support of the National Cultural Foundation in Barbados, with JAMPRO and JAN in Jamaica, and with Titan and Anime Carib in Trinidad and Tobago. So I think once as a freelance animator or freelance professional, you are connected to at least one of these groups. I think that information would come to us in terms of making sure you're covered on the database.
Great. And we also encourage you to ensure that you're a part of the associations, because that's the best way for us to be able to target you and include you in the research data. Amishka asked, she said earlier it was mentioned that some research will be done to assess the industry regionally and internationally. Will that research also take into account the type of content predominantly being published, the target audiences, and that kind of data? The short answer is yes, it will. The research is going to include the studios and the associations, and part of that is, what kind of IP are they developing, and also what type of IP are they working on in terms of servicing contracts. So yes, we think that would be important as well. Adrian Lopez asked, how will the project address concerns of producers concerned about their work being subcontracted to entities that they don't know?
Can you repeat that for me, please?
Sure. How will the project address concerns of producers who are concerned about their work being subcontracted to entities they don't know?
I'm assuming that is from the point of view of a potential client. So a potential client is sitting in Japan and is outsourcing to the Caribbean, and they're outsourcing to company A, but company A is using freelancers or companies Y and Z. Essentially, is that the idea?
I mean, Adrian would have to clarify on the question, but I think that's what he's suggesting.
Okay. I do think part of what we have to ascertain is what is the industry interested in, and when I'll say international clients, potential.
One second, Nika. Sorry to cut you, but I think we have Adrian. Adrian, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Yeah. That was exactly my question. I was wondering about, just as Amishka says about a client in New York or Japan or whatever, they send the work down to our company, but through this program, we're now going to be sending parts of that work to other companies in the Caribbean. How do we address that? Because obviously there'll be NDAs, things they don't want shared, artwork, all that sort of thing, storylines.
Yes, I think part of it is also, so I guess there are a couple different things. The fact that the Caribbean is not necessarily known as an outsourcing hub at this point in time, even though there may be individual projects going on, there's certainly some examples of work that have been outsourced to the Caribbean that has happened without necessarily a whole lot of fanfare. But we're not known as an outsourcing hub. So I think part of what would have to happen is a kind of an education almost to clients of how exactly it would work in the Caribbean. So it would be known upfront that if you are a company in Japan and you're outsourcing to a company in Jamaica, that company in Jamaica is a network of companies that is going to do your work. So that work would have to be disclosed, or sorry, that information would have to be disclosed upfront to clients so that they are comfortable. Part of, one of the things we have talked about and we'll be looking at is the question of the technology that animation companies in the region are using in terms of the consistency. So again, more work, more research to be done and more work to be done there, but the ensuring that there is a consistency between what the potential international client is looking for and what the companies in the region are able to provide. And if there's a gap there, then we're looking at training, then we're looking at upskilling, etc. But I think, to come back to your question with a very long answer, that is something that would have to be declared up front to potential clients, because that is the model that we're trying to promote. And it really is something that would benefit the region from the point of view of the potential to access more opportunities. If company A in Jamaica is only able to access, you know, certain kinds of contracts, then by combining their talents and combining their resources with Trinidad and Tobago and with St. Lucia, etc., that then simply opens up the pool of opportunities. So that would have to be declared up front to the potential client, definitely.
Right, and just to add, the protection of IP may not fall within the purview of the project. And again, we're in the research stage now, but I'm anticipating that would still be the responsibility of the animators and the animation studios. But that is something that we will definitely take into consideration to get an idea of how that can be incorporated into the type of work that we're doing.
Yeah.
Thanks, Nika. Adrian, you can let us know if we answered the question. Patrick said, hi, thank you guys for doing this. Thanks for participating, Patrick. What about a standardization of pricing in the industry, especially where it relates to working with corporate firms and ad agencies? These companies take advantage of creatives without proper compensation, which greatly affects development. Patrick, I agree that is an issue in the industry. And one of the outcomes that we want from this project is to make pricing more transparent. So one of the outcomes is a web portal that will, as part of that web portal, it will be a database of animators. Now it will be up to you whether on that database you want to put exactly what your rates are. We would certainly encourage that you put as much information out there as possible. But we intend to create a platform which would enable you to do that if that is, you know, where you are and that's what you'd like to do. So the web portal is one certain outcome that's going to come out of the project, and we're hoping that the idea is that it would at least address that issue in some way.
Justin, if I can just add, it also supports the point of being a part of the member associations, of the trade associations in their countries, because the trade associations are also where the potential power to manage pricing also comes. If you're individual, whether freelancers or individual companies looking to negotiate pricing, you have a better opportunity to do that if you're represented by trade associations such as JAN in Jamaica and Titan in Trinidad and Tobago. So that's also something that could be looked at, because again, as they say, strength in numbers. So once, you know, all of the animation professionals in Trinidad and Tobago are saying, okay, this is what we charge within a band of, you know, X for certain services, then that gives the collective bargaining power to the group. So that's something I think definitely to be looked at, and we certainly encourage, as we said, to connect with one of these partners in each of these countries.
Thank you, Nika. Okay, so Kathy says, thanks for this. Thank you, Kathy. What's the anticipated timeline between the discovery stage and the incubator stage when companies will be identified to collaborate on taking IP to market? Nika.
So it's, you know, the project overall is is running between September of this year to July next year. So it's a pretty tight timeline that we're looking at. By the end of this phase, which is the initial phase, September to November, we want to have at least an approach for how we would be selecting the companies. And again, having the information on what the companies are and what their readiness to do something like this would be really important to have. And again, just reinforcing that we'll be working through the partners to identify all the stakeholders in the region that would be relevant. So we would have that information up front, and it would be sometime in the middle of the execution phase. And the execution phase is taking place December 2020 to June 2021. So sometime in the middle of that phase is where hopefully we should have the process of actually doing the incubation of the project to test the model.
Thank you, Nika. Renee asks, would the project be addressing local/regional broadcasting or broadcasters, or are we primarily looking at IP? I'm sorry, I lost it. Or are we primarily looking at IP for international broadcasting or outsourcing? I'll take it.
Yeah,
Oh, you can go ahead, Nika.
No, please go ahead.
Okay, at present, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, Nika, the groups that we have considered as part of this pipeline doesn't include broadcasters, but that would certainly be something to consider in how we orient the training institutions and the animation studios. So that is an aspect of it. At present, the broadcasters and the broadcasting system is not within the boundaries of the project.
I agree. I think, but it's a good point that's raised, because I certainly think that we should be looking at them as a regional stakeholder, because again, the project is intended to allow for the creation not just of servicing international or regional contracts, but also the creation of original IP. And so if that work is able to be created with support from the model, where is it distributed, where is it exhibited, and the broadcasters in the Caribbean, that's still a key space for us. So I think it's definitely something we will look at least from in this part of the project, from the point of view of ensuring that they incorporate it as a regional stakeholder.
All right. Thank you. Okay, another question. Will this initiative take into consideration high school programs? At present, it does not. It starts from tertiary schooling up. And I think part of it is because of the program's emphasis on commercialization of animated projects. So again, we understand that this is an important building block to developing those animated products and creating those studios, having that kind of training from the high school level. But we don't think it's possible within the bounds of this project at this moment. Yeah. Okay, how does this program envision building the skill sets needed to support and maintain an animation industry within the Caribbean?
Well, I think a lot of it has to do with structure and infrastructure. So in my experience in the film industry, with a little bit in the animation industry, people tend to come to these industries in various forms. There isn't a straight line between what you study in school and what you end up ultimately doing, whether you're working on a film set or whether you're writing content, or in this case, producing animated content. So a lot of what we have to and we have been doing in the region, certainly through organizations like Film Jamaica and JAMPRO, the film commissions across the region, what we have been doing is working to establish the foundations for these industries. We keep talking about these industries as being in development, and they're in development because they're missing a lot of the building blocks and the foundations for what makes these kinds of industries sustainable and lucrative, quite frankly. And the intent is to have, for this model to be something that gives you, as we've been saying, steps or a tool, which ultimately converts or translates to structure. Structure is reliable. Structure and process tells a potential client, whether in the region or internationally, that you're operating at a certain standard, that everybody is working based on the same rule book. Everybody that's working on this project is doing things according to the same process. And these kinds of structural improvements help to build confidence, and they build trust in the ability of practitioners to do the work. It's not enough to say that you can. It's not enough often to say that, well, I've done work for XYZ. Sometimes having a demonstration that there's an infrastructure that's supporting the work that you're trying to do actually helps to give you credibility as an animation company or as a freelancer. So I think that is what this tool should ultimately do. And again, supported by and buoyed by the representative bodies in the region that have formal responsibility for this kind of work, should be a boon to that idea of establishing the foundation. The CDB and the CIIF fund, you know, the whole idea of the intent of the grant to enable the environment for practitioners to be able to thrive, that's entirely the point. And then JAMPRO and the NCF as state companies that in Jamaica and Barbados that have the responsibility of creating these enabling environments, and then supported by the associations and the festival. These really are the entities that should be doing this work. So that's a long answer to basically saying that the tool should really help to build credibility when looking for projects, not just abroad, but also here. The potential for private sector companies to say, okay, you know, we see that there's some structure being built. We see that there's a process. It might build more trust in the sector if they know that there are processes that are supporting the work that is being put out. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you, Nika. Okay, Adrian asks, is there a danger that this may turn off some potential clients? Well, certainly it's a danger we would want to avoid. First of all...
Sorry, Tristan, could I ask for a bit more clarification on what he means by turn off?
Yeah, Adrian, we'd like you to clarify that, but while we wait, I just want to emphasize that the studios will be a part of this development process. So if it is felt that the tool that we're developing actually makes it more difficult in some way to be able to win these contracts or develop IP, then certainly your feedback would be important for us to position it so that it doesn't have that type of effect. That's one. And two, we can't, nor would we want to force any studios to be a part of the model. We want to make it so that it's easier for the Caribbean to collaborate, but if it's felt that for your studio, it actually doesn't work, which is, again, something we'd want to avoid, then by all means, opt out. But that's the idea, that it would make it, it would be a universal good. It would be a platform for you to be able to opt in to better conduct your business. But again, if it's felt that this doesn't work for you, then we would want that feedback, and we would also say, then sure, go ahead, don't opt in.
No. I didn't mean to give the impression that I think this project is a bad idea. I think it's a great idea. I was just concerned when I heard about that the part of the project would be to educate customers coming in that when you outsource to the Caribbean, you're outsourcing to multiple companies. That's what in particular I was thinking maybe a turnoff for some clients.
A turnoff to potential clients.
Right.
Right.
Well,
Okay.
how we want to position it.
and push and position the Caribbean animation as, look, when you send a project to the Caribbean, you don't know which company is going to get it.
Right. And that's not the idea. What we would be,
we need to be careful of.
yeah. And I agree. What we want to say is instead that when you're working with the Caribbean, you have the option to work with all of these studios, and it would be really easy to do so.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Thanks for that, Adrian. Okay, so we have a comment. To be clear, so the tool is more of a dating platform that connects studios with resources, etc., and not intended to be a commercial entity that would get involved in actual project or managing the pipeline. Well, right, exactly. It wouldn't be a commercial entity, and it wouldn't be managing any pipelines. It would be a set of recommendations, essentially, that are practical and work with, I'm seeing Adrian saying swipe right. It's Tinder for animators. That's the, that's the idea. But yes, exactly. It's more of a platform than it is an entity that dictates that a studio should do this or that. And it should be oriented in such a way that it would make the most sense to plug in to be able to more easily connect with other animation studios. Thank you. Roxanne says, this looks very good. Thank you for this collaboration. It would be great for us to have some clear outputs for the project, a database that has the capacity to evolve, a Caribbean trailer/proof of work quality, outreach to specific stakeholders, international customers, specific training to level the playing field. I do think that this is a first step for a lot of what you've said. For example, the recommendations for training to make training consistent across the region should then be implemented in specific curriculums at the curriculum level. And Nika, I'll let you respond to Roxanne says a database. Hi, Roxanne. Roxanne says a database that has a capacity to evolve. I think we're agreed there. A Caribbean trailer/proof of work quality. Well, as Nika said, right now, we're developing a launch video, Listen Me Caribbean, which is a Jamaican studio, has been contracted to develop a launch video in collaboration with another Caribbean studio. So this is not yet using the model, but it is an example of Caribbean collaboration to begin the project. And at the end of the project, as Nika said, we will have a test project, and we'll be selecting a studio to do that. So that should be the proof of work that we're looking for. To specific stakeholders and international customers, that is a part of the project as well. Yeah, Nika, anything to add there?
No, nothing to add. I would definitely agree that well, I guess I do have something to add. I would definitely agree that the databases should be live and current, and that is why they will be vested with the partners. There's at least one partner in each of the first 3 countries that were responsible for managing the online portal with all this information and keeping it current. That's definitely going to be key to the tool working, is that the information is always accessible and up to date. So definitely in agreement with that.
Thank you. Okay, so Zaki asked what are the criteria for a small company to qualify, and that's criteria that will be developed.
But again, as we've been saying, ensure that you are connected to one of the partners, and so that once we have you on our database as a collective database, you would certainly be considered once you meet the criteria that's set.
Right. Renee asks if this would be a clustering situation that it is that we're suggesting, where a governing body would be a project manager for studios to manage those outsourcing or IP projects. Again, it's under development. As you said, it's an early comment. We are early in the in the process. But clustering is definitely one of the possible ways to orient this type of collaboration. So of course, as we develop, we'll see if that is the best practice for collaboration in the Caribbean. Janine asked, what was the choice behind including Barbados, represented by a state agency, as one of the initial countries, given other territories such as Guyana and Suriname as animation islands have stronger sector animation representative bodies with ready data useful to the creation of this tool? Mika, you want to take that question?
I think from the point of view of JAMPRO submission to CDB, the decision at the time was taken to focus on these 3 countries. Again, the initial part of the research and the work that's going to be done does not, it's not going to preclude us from getting a sense of what's happening in other countries. The research is going to, I think, give us a good base and a good handle, and certainly could set us up for what is going to be the next phase, perhaps, of a project like this in terms of how it rolls out to other countries. So the initial decision was these 3 countries, but certainly, as we've been saying, there is an intent and there is an interest in ensuring that this project, once it works, is able to roll out to the rest of the Caribbean countries under the CDB's list of borrowing countries that that have an interest in developing on their animation sectors.
Thanks, Nika. I think that that covers that question. Anonymous says, so I understand, is it both a Tinder platform and a step-by-step guide? And the way that we see it is at this point in time,
this stage,
is if you were to tick certain boxes, then you would be a part of this this collaboration platform that would then make it easier for you to work with other Caribbean animation studios. So in a way, it is both. But the idea being that we recommend that you fulfill these requirements in order to make it far easier for you to collaborate and be a part of this system that we're developing. Okay, so we're at 1:58, and we said that this is until 2, so I will take 2 more questions that we have here now. Will this program assist animation studios with getting tax breaks, which will encourage international clients to do business in the Caribbean region?
So that's a really good question, and it gives us the chance to reinforce something that we did say in the presentation. There are currently incentives across the region that exist. There are trade agreements across the region that exist. We have CSME in the Caribbean. The intent and a big part of the research is to look at what all of these resources or potential resources have to offer that animation companies and studios can leverage in terms of how they pitch for work. So yes, if a project is coming to the region, you could say, okay, this incentive is available that can give you, you know, give this particular client these particular breaks, whether it's tax breaks, whether it's an economic free zone, whether it's a rebate. There are different things across the region that can be leveraged, and JAMPRO and CDB have recognized that that's something that is important, and it actually is part of the original scope of the project to actively look for, aggregate, and use, where possible, the incentives and the trade agreements that exist in the region.
Thank you. Zaki asks, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, but would there be some sort of a rating system for when a company gets a project to make sure delivery time and quality are met to maintain a high standard for all? And again, we'll keep saying this, and we keep saying that the project is in early development because your input is going to be very important for what this project eventually becomes. That said, I do think that a type of system that identifies recognize animation studios that have in the past successfully delivered on X amount of projects from these companies, or they've developed this IP that's currently being distributed here and here. I think that would be important, but again, it depends on what we eventually come up with. But I do take that point, and I think it will be useful. We said that was the last one, but George Hay, just because I know you, is voice talent development being seriously looked at also, as this is also a vital part of animation. Nika, you want to take that one?
I'm sorry, can you repeat?
Is voice talent development being seriously looked at also, as this is a vital part of animation?
Well, I think similar to the question that was asked earlier, we would be looking at all of the parts of the pipeline that create the ultimate output of a piece of animated content. I think certainly it would be part of what we're looking at. I can't say for certain at this point in time what can be done about it, because I agree it's a really critical part of the process. But certainly it will be considered along with all of the other key parts of the production process for animation.
Thanks, Nico. All right, I said that was the last one, but Andre says that his questions were not able to, he couldn't place them in the question and answer box. But he wanted to say that Barbados facilitates concessions already. Their legislation does this. And that's exactly what we're talking about. So we want to look at the legislation and the incentives in each of these countries to see what exists, what animation studios should be doing to benefit from those incentives, and also what is possible through, possibly through CARICOM, to be able to somehow have animators perhaps from one country benefit from incentives in another. So we'll see what's possible, but that is the idea, to take the resources that we have and orient them in a way that is efficient for all of the animators in the region to be able to benefit from.
And one of the main things is simply finding the information. I mean, I think a lot of the challenge sometimes is simply knowing what is out there. Right here in the Caribbean, a lot of us don't even know what those incentives are. So I think that's a really key output from the project, is simply being able to say, okay, in one go, these are all the incentives that are available. If a project is being pitched for Trinidad and Tobago and Barbados collectively, what in those countries can be put on the table to make it more attractive to a client? What regionally, in terms of CSME and CARICOM, what agreements exist there that can make it more attractive to a client? So that's going to be a really important piece of what makes the model as well rich and actually able to do the work that we intended to do.
Okay, thank you, Nika. We're going to have to end it there. I see that we still have more questions. These questions are being recorded. We have your email addresses with registration, and we'll email your responses following this within the next week. So we're seeing them. We'll respond. Thank you again for all of your input. I have to emphasize that we will want that input throughout this process. Again, get involved with your animation associations, if you're not, and make it easier for us to connect with you to get your input, so that at the end of the day, this model that comes out actually does benefit you, the animator, the animation studio, the training institution, and the animation association. Thank you again for your input. Thanks for participating. Nico, thank you for your presentation. And we'll be in touch. Bye, everyone.